Friends, I'm recording this part after finishing the main narration. A spontaneous idea came to me to turn this story into an audio drama. So if any of you were planning to fall asleep to it, now's your chance. Alright. I won't interrupt your listening. The Murky Trails. Somewhere on the border of forgotten lands, where dust hides in the cracks of the earth and the wind blows only the dead out of the sand, the sun sinks below the horizon, painting the plains the color of blood. In the silence, spurs jingle, a saddle creaks, and only the sound of hooves reminds you, someone is still alive. But here, on these trails, the living meet the dead more often than they meet other people. And if you hear a whisper in the dark, spoken in an Indian tongue, don't turn around. You've stepped onto the murky trails. You can hear the restless ones from far away. They're slow, and they don't have much brain left. And really, where would brains come from? Whatever was there, rot has eaten away, and nothing new is going to grow. That's why the restless ones make noise, like cattle being driven along a trail. Except cattle don't eat flesh. I scanned the line. Farmers aren't much in the way of fighters, sure, but it doesn't take great skill to shoot a restless one. A corpse is a corpse. Stupid. No strategy, no tactics. They just push forward, choking on their own rotten saliva. You stand and shoot, like at a target. Only problem is, there's no sun. In this eternal gray murk, you can't see farther than 20 paces. But we're used to it by now. The farmers grip their carbines and shotguns tight. By God, I swear I saw the barrels of a couple muskets in the line. No. Not yet. Too early. Can't see a damn thing. Wait, I shouted. And the restless ones answered from the twilight with hungry, dog-like growls. Everyone wait. Shuffling footsteps drew closer. Dark shapes emerged. The restless ones swayed like drunks, stumbled over stretched wire, fell and writhed on the ground like giant beetles. Get ready. I raised my worn Henry rifle to my shoulder. The line rippled, bristled with barrels. Aim. Fire. The gloom flared with muzzle flashes. The first wave of restless ones dropped into the grass. Then the second. Then the third. I waved my hand, and my little army tossed their guns aside, grabbed hoes, and rushed in for close combat. They're more used to swinging hoes, after all. Rose Button, Arizona Territory. The year of our Lord, 1869. God help me, I don't remember how I ended up here. I met the Baptist preacher in one of those mad prospectors' settlements that pop up in the South like boils on a boy's face. The holy man nearly convinced me the Last Judgment had already come, and God had cursed us. That's why we see neither moon nor sun, and why our dead can't find rest. But I reckon the preacher was wrong. There's no true darkness here, just murk, twilight. And the dead can be put to rest. Hard sometimes, sure, but possible, if you set your mind to it. I didn't argue. We were drinking cheap whiskey in a saloon, and the preacher was well past sober. And I have two rules: don't argue with drunk men, and don't contradict men of God. Pointless business. Still, it's curious how this all came to be. Another preacher claimed God was disgusted by the fratricidal war between North and South. Now we must atone until we're cleansed of sin. That one wasn't Baptist, Methodist. They all say the same thing, just differently, and never agree on anything. An old farmer I once stayed with overnight insisted it was simpler than that. Too many dead. War. Disease. Famine. God just can't process them fast enough. Leaves them here for now. Once he's caught up, he'll sort them out, hell or heaven. People say all kinds of things. Words are just air and dust, driven by the wind. I was never good with words. Shooting, though, that I could do. The fiddler played badly, but they paid him anyway. Mama M used to have a pianist in her saloon, but when he drank himself to death, profits fell hard. Drinking moonshine is one thing, drinking with music is another. Farmers could drink at home, so Mama M didn't get picky and hired a fiddler. So what if he can't hit a note? Drunks don't care. I sat at the back table, my back to the wall, smoking. The homegrown tobacco burned my throat, stung my nose, made me want to sneeze. That's what's wrong with Rose Button, no proper tobacco. I'm leaving this place. Sick of it. Not a town, a swamp. A church, a square, and 5 streets. 3 whores for the whole place, all one-eyed. No, Rose Button isn't a place for a man, unless he's a farmer. How did I even end up here? I spotted Clive immediately. Hard not to spot Clive. Big as a grizzly, and just as hairy. He pushed through the local drunks like a steamboat through early autumn ice. Hey, Mort, he waved a shovel-sized hand. I waved back. Righty, I said, not that I expected trouble, but habit's second nature. As my grandma used to say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Pick the back table. Sit with your back to the wall. Keep your right hand free. Once you learn it, you don't forget, like reading. Evening, Mort. Clive dropped into the chair and wiped sweat off his brow. He always sweated, heat or cold, like there was a fire smoldering inside that huge body. We need to talk. Talk, I nodded, sliding him the bottle. Empty glasses already littered the table. Clive grabbed the bottle with his monstrous paw, filled a glass to the brim, and downed it in one gulp. You busy this week? He asked, blinking away tears. The whiskey was trash, but Mama M didn't skimp on pepper. Bald Frankie swore he'd seen her dump rattlesnake heads into the barrel scraps. Frankie's a liar, sure, but I believed him on that one. Let me think, I said. Meeting with the mayor today, the governor tomorrow, lunch with the president on Thursday. You joking, Clive? What could I possibly be busy with in this hole? Perfect, Clive said, smiling. This was serious business, and Clive approached it properly. The smile was born deep in his beard, crept up to his eyes, gathered in the wrinkles on his brow. I swear even his ears twitched. If he'd had a tail, it would have been wagging. So you'll take the caravan? Yeah, I said. I'll take it. Not much else for me to do here anyway. I train farmers to shoot. Show them how to build barricades against the restless ones. Escort caravans. And drink. That's my life. I tried leaving Rose Button once. Rode a long way down a deserted road drowned in pale mist. The desert stretched endlessly beside me, sand, brittle skeletons of bushes, gray stones along the roadside. Eventually it felt like the horse was just moving its legs while we stood still, and the fog flowed through us like water through a net. I couldn't remember where I was going, or why. So I turned back to Rose. And drank. I often dream of that day. That fight along the scorched bank of a narrow river overgrown with reeds. I never learned its name. At first, we had no time for that. Later, it simply stopped mattering. The river was on one side, the forest on the other. The Yankees couldn't flank us, not from the north, not from anywhere. We fired at them. They fired at us. The dead fell into sun-bleached grass, and sometimes the living fell too. Just to become dead themselves. I like war. It's simple. There's you. There's the enemy. There's the trench. The world becomes very easy to understand when you look at it through iron sights. Death? What about it? Death is always nearby anyway. In dirty water, in consumptive coughs, in drought that kills the crops. On a bullet, it's easy. When you give someone a bullet, you're giving them a quick death. What's there to mourn? I lay behind an earthen embankment and shot like at a shooting gallery. Bang, lever clack. Bang, reload, lever clack. Blue figures stumbled and fell, freezing under the sun as useless piles of dyed wool. And when one of those piles twitched, then slowly stood up. I didn't understand what was happening. No one did. The Yankee swayed on his feet, turning in place like he couldn't decide where to go. I saw the dark stain of blood on his chest. I saw the torn exit wound in his back, left by a tired bullet. I thought he was wounded. Delirious with pain. I fired again. Not because I hated Yankees. I just wanted to put the poor bastard at ease. There was nothing else I could do for him. People don't live with wounds like that. But the bastard turned and started walking toward our trench, dragging his feet through hot dust. His jaw hung open. His eyes didn't blink. And for some reason the right one wasn't looking where the left one was. Then others started getting up. Gray coats. Blue coats. Back then, we didn't know you had to shoot them in the head. Now we do. I'd like to say many of us stayed behind by that nameless river. That would be a lie. The dead all wandered off. The living, yes. There aren't many of us left. Just me, it seems. Looks like I was the only one who figured out that the risen need their brains blown out. After that, it was simple. Like target practice. The restless ones are slow. And stupid. I often dream that I'm lying behind that embankment again. Bang, a blue figure drops into the dust. Bang, a gray figure drops. Bang. Bang bang. Sometimes I wonder. Maybe I'm still there. Maybe this cursed rose button is the dream. A caravan always gathers on the main square. That's a rule no one ever breaks. God knows why. Maybe because great events must happen in great places. And where else can you gather a handful of battered wagons if not on a dusty patch in front of a crooked shed everyone's decided to call City Hall? People always arrive late. That's the second unbreakable rule. If you tell them to come before dark, they show up at dawn. If you agree to leave at dawn, they arrive by noon. They make excuses. Need to feed the livestock. Wait for fresh bread. Patch a boot that suddenly fell apart. There are always reasons. But I think people just don't want to go. Something holds them at home. The first step beyond the threshold is the beginning of the end. Like the moment a hammer touches glass. Everything's still whole. But in the next second, shards will explode, cruelly slicing reality apart. Still. It's good for me. Gives me time to sober up. A mug of Mama M's sour beer is just what you need in the morning. Helps you see the world right. That's how Speckled Wolf found me. There's no better tracker than a redskin. And they always crawl in on the scent of cheap whiskey. Mama M spotted his tall, hunched figure through the window and immediately uncorked a bottle, filling a shot glass to the brim. I greet you, my pale-faced brother. Speckled Wolf sat opposite me, folding his hands, stiff, wooden hands. The thick, crooked nail on his thumb looked like the shell of some ancient turtle. Been a while since I've seen you. He silently slid the whiskey toward me. 3 feathers in his greasy gray braids nodded in agreement. What news? I asked. Rose Button doesn't hear much. Different things, he said. My wife's nephew claims the restless ones are gathering. He rode past a canyon and saw a whole army of dead settled there. Do you believe him? I believe he saw something. But I also know that when Badger came home, he stank of liquor and had not a single coin left in his pockets. The light from the oil lamps turned Speckled Wolf's wrinkled face into an old wooden mask. You Indians and drunks, I said. When the gods made people, they made them the same. Just painted them different colors. Speckled Wolf waved to Mama M. She poured another round. I nodded and took a sip. Colonel Colt called his revolver the great equalizer. Well then, drink is the great unifier. This world is full of great things. How's your wife? She was sick in spring. Teeth went bad. Had to pull them. Now she's well. I nodded sympathetically. You can't rush Indians. First you talk about weather. Then news. Then all the gossip. Only after that are you allowed to get down to business, unless you want to be known as a rude man. I'm glad she's better. Without teeth, eating's hard. She manages. Chews on the left side. Still has teeth there. How's your wound? I touched the scar on my forehead. Same. That's for rain. And when did it ache last? The crops could use rain. Well, I said, I'm sorry to disappoint you, my red brother. I feel just fine. Shame. Rain would be good. Where did I get this scar? I don't remember. Speckled Wolf always appears on caravan day. Just walks into the saloon, sits down, drinks his whiskey. Always 2 shots, no more, no less. I've often wondered how he knows when to come. I asked Clive once. He said he sends boys to fetch the Indians. Not far, he said. Past the cornfields, turn right, follow the river. Half an hour, you'll see the clay huts of the reservation. I went myself. There were fields. There was a river. There was a deserted rocky shore overgrown with stiff red grass, birds bursting up from it again and again. But there was no reservation. I rode longer than half an hour. Found nothing. Only stones. Dry grass. Birds flapping from under the horses' hooves. And that dull gray murk flooding the world like thick jelly. I turned back. I never saw the fork where I supposedly went the wrong way. And how much can you see in this twilight anyway? Who are we taking today? I asked. Speckled Wolf stared at me without blinking. His black eyes gleamed like beetle wings. 4 wagons. The pastor's taking Rosie Adams' wife, her brother, Big Tom's father, and Delahaye. The girl fell from a horse. That's bad, I said. I don't like hauling children. Yes. Bad. Children are the worst. No, their parents are worse. The children themselves don't care anymore. Speckled Wolf set his empty glass aside and wiped his mouth carefully. I took my last swallow of beer and stood. Let's not keep them waiting. Don't worry, he said. Where we're going, no one is late. We stepped outside. Cold wind carried the smell of water. On the horizon, the sky flashed with blue electrical veins. Distant thunder rumbled, muffled and strange, like an old dog growling. You wanted rain? I wanted rain on our fields. The wagons were already waiting. People stood in a tight cluster, silent, confused. Only Rosie was speaking excitedly, wringing her hands, but no one listened. Her brother stared at her with dull, empty eyes, gently swaying. They always sway. Like they hear music. They can stand like that even if you light a fire around them. If they're dead, they'll burn without moving. I stopped in the middle of the square and took off my hat. The wind immediately tore through my hair. The wet band left on my forehead by the hatband had gone cold. Well then, ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. We ride. My miserable travelers flinched away from one another, as if I'd caught them doing something indecent. Rosie grabbed her brother's hand and dragged him toward the wagon. Teddy Adams shuffled along, dragging his feet through the dust. The wind whipped his hair into his eyes. Teddy didn't blink. I've always wondered why it's like this. Why one corpse just sits and waits until it rots down to bones, while another tries to tear your throat out. What does it depend on? Character? Sins? The way a man died? Or nothing at all? Just chance. You can draw an ace, or you can draw a deuce. It's all in the Lord's hand, or whoever's hand it is. For some reason, I'm sure I'll become a restless one after death. I'll wander the twilight, listening, sniffing, searching for those who stepped carelessly beyond the fence. I've been a buffalo hunter, a mercenary, a sheriff, and a bandit. I've been a soldier too. Whatever I did, I killed. That's just how it worked out. And God is my witness, I was good at it. I'd probably make a fine restless one. Kill to feed. I'm a master at that. The wagons rolled slowly along the road. Wheels creaked. Canvas snapped in the wind. Hooves struck the dusty ground in steady rhythm. If you close your eyes, you can imagine some strange machine at work. Or a centipede crawling forward. A wooden, creaking centipede. I didn't close my eyes. Last thing I needed was to fall asleep. Muted hoofbeats sounded behind us. Speckled wolf, true to his people's ways, never shot his horse. Time to stop for the night. Did the spirits tell you that? To hear spirits, one must be alone and cleanse the mind, reach harmony with the universe. You wouldn't understand that, my pale-faced brother. Good. I don't need to. No reason to bother spirits when all you have to do is look and think. The girl in the second wagon's nodding off. She'll fall under a hoof any minute. You want one more not dead on our hands? Perhaps she'll become a restless one, he said calmly. And then we won't have to take her anywhere. You say that like it amuses you. Worse, he replied. I don't care. I just want to reach the place faster. Speckled wolf looked at me with his indifferent, shining eyes. Dust had settled into his face, deep wrinkles like cracks in dried earth. You rush for nothing, Mort. The rock has stood on that shore for hundreds of years. It will stand a few days more. I'm not a rock. I don't have hundreds of years. Who knows, my pale brother? Who knows? I pulled the reins and raised my hand. Camp. Circle the wagons. Pastor, where the hell are you turning? Circle. I said circle. Who told me about this rock? I remember every bend in the road. Every stone by the roadside. Every tree. I close my eyes and see the jagged line of mountains on the horizon. Once, back when there was sunlight, they were red, yellow, and brown. Now they're just gray. The twilight ate the color and spat out a moldy shape. Sometimes I wonder where this road even came from. The deep ruts cut into hard red earth look like scars. To carve tracks like that, hundreds of wagons must have passed here. Who rode out to a barren rock by the ocean? And why? The dead haven't been dead that long, a couple of years at most. That's not enough time to pack down a road like this. And I've never seen anyone here but us. Never saw tracks either, no hoofprints, no fire pits. Maybe it's the hole in my skull that left the scar. Head wounds do that. They mix up time. If so, I got off easy. Could have been worse. I've seen strong men after that, drooling, shitting themselves. A pitiful sight. So maybe I'm lucky. I sit in the saddle. I hold a weapon. I lead the caravan. And memory? What's memory for? Life's shit anyway. Nothing worth remembering. Dead wood crackled in the fire, spitting resin. Red sparks burst upward like fireworks. I sipped coffee with a strong taste of chicory and kept silent. Those sitting nearby were silent too. The living because they were tired. The not dead because they were dead. They loomed like mournful pillars behind their living relatives. Through the smoke, I could clearly smell rotting flesh. Only Delahay's daughter sat close to her mother, pressed against her soft side. Where the girl's face touched her, a damp stain was already spreading. The Delahays had delayed the departure too long. Now the mother powdered the girl's face, carefully curling her hair around bits of paper, hoping the curls would hide the signs of decay. Once, she even put a bonnet on her. But the ribbon was tied too tight, cutting into the cheek, and the soft flesh split open like an old, soggy sponge. You can't wait this long with the knot dead. You can't. But how do you explain that to people? Speckled Wolf emerged soundlessly from the milky gloom and clapped me on the shoulder. I'll take a look around. I nodded without turning. Once, I was curious how a man becomes a wolf. I'd step away from the fire and watch as Speckled Wolf slowly undressed, neatly folding his cheap canvas trousers and shirt. He rubbed himself with fat mixed with ash and herbs. His old, sagging body grew slick and reeked of something sharp and dangerous. Then the Indian dropped to all fours, stuck his bony backside in the air, and rolled backward. I don't know how he didn't break his spine. That's where it happened. A man began the roll. A wolf finished it. Nothing special, really. Unless you enjoy watching naked old men. Big Tom pulled out a harmonica and blew. The sound, sharp as a scream, shot up into the gray sky. Mrs. Delahaye flinched. The girl beside her didn't move. Fire reflected in her wide, unblinking eyes. Big Tom started playing. First a sad Waiting for You, then a cheerful My Sally Lee. Rosie tried to sing along, but fell silent under the pastor's stern gaze. Some people are like that. They don't enjoy themselves, and won't let others either. I took out my flask and shook it. Judging by the sound, more than half was left. No pastor's going to ruin my joy. I took a swig of whiskey and squeezed my eyes shut, blinking away tears. When I opened them, a massive wolf was sitting beside me. He licked his gray muzzle and yawned, letting a long pink tongue hang out. His fangs were yellow and blunt. The fur along his neck was thinning, coming out in ugly clumps. Even in his second skin, Speckled Wolf was old. The harmonica shrieked and fell silent. 4 pairs of eyes stared at the wolf in terror. Yeah. That damned Indian loves dramatic entrances. I shoved him in the warm, furry shoulder. Go on. Don't sit there. Don't ruin people's rest. That cursed redskin's worse than the pastor. When a cold, wet nose nudged me, the fire was almost out. I sat up, stretched, tossed thin branches onto the embers. Once it flares up, I can boil coffee. Well? All clear. The wolf nodded his broad head, froze as if listening, then furiously scratched behind his ear with a hind leg. Get away from me. Last thing I need is your parasites crawling onto me. Whites and Indians ought to have different lice. The wolf stretched his mouth into a grin, bearing a solid row of yellowish molars, and padded off toward his clothes. I hooked the kettle and set it over the fire. Yesterday's coffee had gone cold, covered in a cloudy rainbow film. Filth, sure, but drinkable. Especially with a splash of whiskey. The pastor's wife, in a black morning dress, stood by the wagon, straight as a post. For some reason, she looked exactly the same as she had in life. The same yellowish face. The same mouth clamped into a thin, hard line, like a rein. I wonder how the pastor realized his wife was dead. Poked her with a stick? Speckled Wolf appeared on the move, buttoning his shirt. Want some coffee? Wouldn't say no. I lit a cigarette and offered one to Speckled Wolf. See anything? Mice. Hares. A coyote's trail. You know what I'm really asking. Yes. I know. No restless ones nearby. You can stop worrying. A pair passed west a couple hours ago, but far off. The scent was barely there. They leave? Yes. Speckled Wolf inhaled with pleasure and, pursing his lips like he was about to kiss someone, blew a perfect ring of smoke. Rosie climbed out of the wagon, yawning and tugging at her wrinkled dress. Her brother followed her like he was tied to her. When Rosie stopped, he awkwardly bumped into her shoulder. "Good morning. Any coffee?" "For a lady, there's always coffee." "Take my seat." "And you?" "On watch. Someone's got to guard the camp while everyone eats." I trusted Speckled Wolf's judgment. If the old sinner said there were no restless ones here, then there weren't any. But I had no desire to listen to Indian fairy tales, and this was exactly the time for fairy tales. People blinked sleepily, warming their hands around mugs, barely talking. Mrs. Delahaye rocked her daughter. One of the girl's eyes no longer opened. Speckled Wolf looked over those gathered by the fire and cleared his throat. His moment had come. Sometimes I think he travels with us just to tell these foolish legends, because back in his own tribe, everyone's long since sick of listening to them. "I will tell you an old Indian legend," he began. "It speaks of the time when there was neither sun nor moon." The pastor frowned. Interest flickered across Rosie's face and Mrs. Delahaye's. They were hearing this story for the first time. Speckled Wolf drew a deep breath. He felt the gratitude of his listeners. That always inspired him. I stepped aside, tossed a blanket on the ground, and sat down. The words still reached me, but muffled, as if through cotton. And so, from the underworld rose the turquoise boy and the white shell girl. They lived with the first man and the first woman in one hogan, as a single family, and slept beside them. When the first man and the first woman began to whisper, the turquoise boy asked what they were speaking of. "Do you plan some evil?" "No," said the first man, "we wish to create the sun and the moon. We intend no evil and no foolishness." The boy and the girl agreed, but the boy said that if the sun were to rise every day, it must be paid for. The first man agreed that this was fair. "What payment do you ask?" The turquoise boy said, "The sun gives life, but the sun must also take it." I glanced back. Speckled Wolf spoke with his eyes closed, swaying slightly, as if dreaming. The listeners had gone silent, forgetting their coffee. Only the pastor pressed his lips together in displeasure. He looked very much like his wife, thin and yellow. At a glance, you couldn't tell which of them was dead. The first man agreed that the payment to the sun would be the lives of fish and birds, plants, beasts, and all people who walk the earth. Then he and the first woman found fire and heated a round turquoise stone and a white shell. The boy entered the turquoise, holding a flute. He became the sun and began his journey across the sky. When he plays his flute, the months change on earth. The girl entered the shell and became the moon. She, too, carried a flute. A strange story. I don't like this one. I don't like thinking that the sun is a child imprisoned inside burning turquoise. I'm a dull white man. I prefer to believe in a carpenter's son nailed to a hill. The rocky, ritual-scarred hills were a cursed place. Restless ones wandered here constantly, like lice in a soldier's coat. God knows why they were drawn to it. Maybe they liked the view from the heights. Or maybe they weren't as stupid as they seemed, and preferred to wait for wagons where horses couldn't even break into a trot. Sometimes I was lucky, and the caravan slipped through the hills without meeting them. Not this time. Speckled Wolf, running beside my horse, was the first to hear them. Or smell them. Who can tell with Indians? He growled, bared his blunt fangs, and raised his tail, bald and ragged like a battle-torn regimental banner. Far? I squinted into the eternal twilight. The wolf thought, then nodded. Can we get out of the ravine in time? He shook his head. They'll come fast. That was bad. But the ravine left no room to maneuver, and that was good. When restless ones can't spread out, they bunch together and shove each other like sheep in a pen, knocking one another down. All you have to do then is keep shooting. And I could do that. I weighed our few options carefully. The caravan was a sorry lot. 3 men, not counting the Indian, and me. The pastor was good only for praying. Delahaye was blind as a mole. I raised my hand, stopping the slowly rolling wagons. Ace. Stop. Damn it. Turn the wagon sideways across the ravine and unhitch the horses. Stop. I said stop. Turn. Tom was the first to pull his reins, forcing his horse sharply right. The others followed. 3 wagons were enough to block the narrow passage. The fourth, the pastor's, stopped off to the side. At first, I thought of setting it as a second line. Then I changed my mind. Maybe it wasn't such a bad thing if at least one wagon survived. God knows what would happen to the rest. Unharness the horses and tie them farther away. Tom, Mr. Delahaye, take your weapons and get into position behind the wagons. Rosie, go to the pastor. Rosie frowned, glanced at me, then at her brother, and instead of obeying, pulled an old carbine from beneath the mattress and headed toward the men. Rosie, I'm doing what must be done, and you, Mort, do what must be done too. I shook my head. Everyone has their own road to hell. And who am I to block the way? The pastor stood beside his wife, straight as a rod. His lips moved soundlessly. Holy Father, you should take a weapon. Bullets work on the restless better than prayers. The pastor either didn't hear me or chose not to. He whispered with his eyes shut tight. I could see his eyeballs moving beneath the parchment skin of his eyelids. I scanned the steep rock thresholds rising around us and pushed my hat back on my head. The gorge was a mine shaft. Stone below, stone on both sides. Only the roof was missing, and that was a blessing. Nothing would collapse. Come here, my red-skinned brother. I've got a job for you. The wolf sat beside me, tilting his head. One ear stood upright, the other, torn, hung like a chewed rag. I unfastened my bag and pulled out a bundle of dynamite sticks. Ideally, I should have laid them out across the gorge, one by one, to seal the entire perimeter. A scattered blast in a narrow space is a terrible thing, but there was no time. And I didn't have enough fuse anyway. Only a quarter of a coil left. I fixed the detonator to the bundle and handed the dynamite to the wolf. Take it forward and drop it where there are more rocks. Then come straight back. Peggy the wolf grabbed the dynamite by the rope and trotted off with businesslike focus. The blasting fuse trailed behind him. The spool in my hands began to unwind rapidly. What are you doing? Tom's eyes were as round as saucers, his voice cracking. Shrapnel is a wonderful thing. Works on the living and the dead alike. But you don't have shrapnel. We had stones. Thank God for his small mercies. The spool stopped. I cut the fuse, pressed it into the grass, and pinned it down with my boot. Soon the wolf emerged from the gloom and trotted back toward me, sides heaving. I listened. The air moving between the stone walls of the gorge already carried slow, shuffling steps. The restless were approaching. Hungry dead men were coming for us, and we prepared as best we could. Duck. Get behind the wagon boards. Pastor, if you're useless, crawl under the wagon and leave your wife alone. She, unlike you, has nothing left to fear. I lit a cigarette and began counting. I listened to the slow, steady steps, like rain, and counted. And when the voice inside me said, 0, I bent down, lifted the fuse, brought it to my cigarette, and took a drag. The detonator flared. The crackling spark cheerfully raced away and vanished into the dry grass. The steps continued for 1 second, then another, then a third, and then a dense wave of hot air slammed into us, followed by the roar of the explosion. Canvas was torn from the wagons and scattered among the scraggly bushes on the slopes. A hail of stone lashed the sides. A severed arm wrapped in a worn sleeve landed beside me. The decayed fingers blindly pawed at the ground, sifting pebbles like grain fouled by mice. I kicked the dead hand aside. Now, fire. Don't waste your ammo. Aim for the head. After the blast, the dry crack of gunfire sounded almost quiet. The restless emerged from the murk and fell, forming a strange kind of dam. They piled atop one another, silent, indifferent. Some still twitched, slowly and senselessly moving their limbs, as if swimming in deep water. The wall of bodies grew fast, but a second wave followed the first, then a third. We fired and fired, barely aiming. The dead kept coming, slow, clumsy, with doomed persistence. One came straight at me. Its face was destroyed. The lower jaw was gone. In its place gaped a torn throat, from which a black tongue dangled. It lurched forward, jerking. The bridge of its nose was centered in my sights. The forehead swayed above the front post. I pulled the trigger. The head burst with dull slime. The body took 2 more steps before collapsing. That's it. Good. Fire. Rosie. Pale and focused, Rosie worked the bolt with fast, confident motions. Brass casings flashed gold as they flew and tumbled in the dust. Fire. Headshots. Finish the rotten bastards. The air in the gorge filled with the stench of decaying flesh and sour gunpowder smoke. The restless kept pouring out of the darkness, and I was already counting my remaining rounds when I noticed strange movement at the edge of my vision. The pastor had left the wagon and stepped into the line of fire. Small, frail, his cassock flapping. He looked like a scarecrow with a round hat shoved onto its head. In his hands was a Smith & Wesson. The barrels wavered. With shaking hands, the pastor raised the revolver. His eyes were wide, completely insane. He pulled the trigger and let out a thin scream, like a mortally wounded hare. He screamed and fired until the cylinder ran dry. The hammer clicked uselessly on empty chambers, casings falling out, and the pastor kept screaming. And then the restless ended too, as if that shrill, drilling sound had been a powerful spell banishing demons. No one else emerged from the gloom. The gunfire faded. The pastor still screamed. I approached, pried the yellowed fingers open, and took the revolver from his hands. That's enough. Enough. The pastor fell silent, staring at his palms. He rubbed one, then the other. Thou shalt not kill, he asked suddenly. That depends. Besides, you didn't kill anyone. All these people were long and irreversibly dead. You did what had to be done. You didn't abandon those in need. That's a godly act. Your wife would be proud of you. Unsteady, the pastor wandered off. Dark sweat stains spread under his arms. He stumbled a couple of times over stones but didn't fall. Reaching his wife, he took her hand and stood there, unmoving. Once again, I couldn't tell who among them was alive, and who was not. I heard the gulls first, and only then saw the cliff. They cried sharply and mournfully, like orphaned mourners at a grave. The sea boomed against the rocks, and the air smelled of seaweed and rotten fish. The horses grew restless, tossing their heads and snorting in confusion. Rosie pulled the reins and brought the wagon to a halt. Is this the place? Yes, Mort. This is it. A low cliff jutted out over the sea, stabbing the sky like an old, blunted tooth. There were no bushes, no grass, only gray, weather-beaten stone. I flicked away my cigarette and crushed it under my heel so the fire wouldn't spread to the grass. Yes. This is it. You can't go any farther. We unharnessed the horses, hobbled them, and let them graze on the sparse, wind-scoured grass. The wagons, stripped of their canvas covers, looked wrong. Rags of cloth fluttered on the frames like strips of skin on the ribs of dead whales. I lit another cigarette, shielding it with my palm from the wind. So here we are, I said. We always arrive. And always on time. I told you, my pale-faced brother, no one can be late here. That's because you have nowhere to hurry to. An old wife, cornfields, cheap tobacco. You just don't want to go home. And you? He asked. Is that where you're hurrying? No. I'm hurrying to Mama M. Her whiskey's garbage, but she's got plenty of it. The pastor took a black mourning bonnet from the wagon and carefully placed it on his wife's head, clumsily tying the wide ribbons beneath her chin. The Delahaye family stood clinging to one another, pressing their daughter close. The mother stroked the girl's narrow back. The Indian sat down on the ground, tilted his head back, and let the cold, damp wind wash over his face. Lead them. Why is it always me? Maybe this time you lead them. No. It's your job. I only accompany and warn of danger. You show the way. I shrugged. Red men, the laziest people in the world. Ready? Line up. Hold hands. Watch your footing. The ground here is bad. We climbed slowly. A narrow, rocky path twisted between sparse acacia bushes, winding aimlessly. Gravel slipped beneath our feet. The wind tore at dried stalks of grass, flinging sand into our faces. I went first. Behind me walked the pastor, hand in hand with his wife. Then Rosie with her brother, Tom with his father, and the Delahayes last. Even here, they hesitated. The sky above was milky white, cloudy like a cataract. The rock beneath our feet pulsed in time with the crashing waves. We reached a granite platform fouled by gull droppings. Below us churned the gray sea. White foam, like combings from an old woman's hair, settled on the rocks and slid back down. They know what to do, I said. I never explain, but they always know. Must be stories back in town. Everyone knows them, except me. The pastor briefly embraced his wife and kissed her dry cheek. Rosie sobbed, clutching her brother, who stared ahead with dull indifference. Tom held his father's hand, his lips trembling. The pastor led his wife toward the edge. With each step, she moved more easily. The stiff, wooden gate faded. Her fingers instinctively gathered the hem of her dress. She turned back toward us. Her face was surprised, almost excited. The pastor opened his mouth to speak, but instead crossed her with a trembling hand. The sea struck the rocks. She stopped at the edge, closed her eyes, listening to the steady roar. Then she straightened, shuddered, and went still. Her features softened. Her arms fell limp. Dead. Now truly dead. Her body fell into the cold gray waves below. The pastor wept. They always awaken at the end. Their final steps make them alive again, just long enough to die forever. Sometimes I think that's a kindness. It's easier to die while listening to the sea. Sometimes I think it's cruel. No one should die twice. Once is more than enough. Rosie took her brother's hand and led him to the edge. Tom went next. Delahaye guided his wife himself, holding her so she wouldn't fall too soon. Before stepping off, the girl stopped, picked a few stalks of grass, and offered the pitiful, scraggly bouquet to her father. Delahaye took it, clenched it in his fist, his nails digging into his palm. I wondered what he would do with it. The living bring flowers to the dead. Not the other way around. The gulls screamed. One day there will be a mountain of bones here, taller than the cliff itself. The sea will polish them smooth with its cold, wet tongue. Or maybe not. Maybe all this will end tomorrow, and the dead will lie in the ground as God intended. We went back down. Peggy Wolf had already built a fire, and found my flask. He pretended he'd saved it for me, but I didn't believe him. Only a few swallows remained. You finished your work, white man? Yes. We'll rest a bit. Then head back. Tom stood at the shoreline, throwing gray pebbles into the water. They sank without a splash, like lead bullets. I unscrewed the cap and took a sip. When do you think this will end? Peggy Wolf shrugged and took the flask from me. I don't think about it. Why would I? The gods decide. You've got a theory though. In a proper world, the sun shines. It takes lives as payment. In a broken world, the sun refuses to shine. It no longer accepts payment, and people don't die. When the world is fixed, death will return. And so will the sun. Simple, I said. Very simple. Everyone has a theory now. The priest. The lumberjack. The gravedigger. Even the Indian. Theories are like lice, one in every head. How can one world hold so many theories? The world is big. There's room. And you? What do you think? I think we should eat, sleep, and then go home. I'll check what Rosie's throwing in the pot. The salami smells like it's gone bad. I hope I won't be running for a bush all the way back. There aren't many along the road, and the few there are scrawny. The fiddler played badly, horribly out of tune. The thin, jittery strings made my teeth vibrate. I don't know why Mama M doesn't throw him out. Silence would be better than that noise. Clive pushed through the local drunks, his round belly leading the way. Hey, Mort. How'd it go? I shrugged, as usual. Ran into the restless on the way there. Big group. Bad luck. On the way back, smooth. Straight as a ruler. Truth is, I don't remember the return trip. I never do. The road to the cliff, I remember perfectly. Every step. Every face. Every fight. But the way back? Gone. Like days cut clean out of my memory. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe the wound. If there's a scar on your forehead, there was a hole once. And a hole in the head can do stranger things than that. Clive grinned and pulled the bottle closer. There was barely anything left. You free this week? I lit a cigarette and raised my glass. Completely. Wanna head to Dodge City? Cards. Girls. Got a caravan to run. How did I end up in Rose Button? I don't remember. That's all for today, guys. Write in the comments what you think. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and see you next time.